Welcome. I'm Patti Davies, Chair of the AOTF Board of Trustees. We're delighted that you could join us for the 2026 Research Excellence Symposium. AOTF promotes and celebrates research excellence at various stages with the vision of having a vibrant science that builds knowledge to support effective, evidence-based occupational therapy. This year, we're excited to hear from our early and mid-career Research Excellence awardees, as well as our Lifetime Achievement awardee, who will share their remarkable career journey and latest research. I would also like to extend my sincere thanks to the AOTF Awards and Recognition Committee for their time, hard work, and dedication in reviewing the outstanding pool of candidates we had this year. If anybody on the committee is here, please raise your hand and wave. Well, thank you to everyone who did the work. With that, let's dive into today's program. The AOTF Early and Mid-Career Research Excellence Awards recognize and support researchers who are making significant contributions and show great promise in advancing our knowledge and understanding of the field of occupational therapy. Our 2026 Early Career Research Excellence awardee, Dr. Emily Kringle, is an assistant professor in the School of Kinesiology, director of the Disability and Wellness (DWELL) Laboratory at the University of Minnesota. She earned her master's degree in occupational therapy at the University of North Dakota, her PhD at rehabilitation science at the University of Pittsburgh, and completed postdoctoral research training at the University of Illinois Chicago in the departments of occupational therapy and medicine. Dr. Kringle integrates her training in occupational therapy, rehabilitation science, and behavioral medicine to develop health promotion interventions that can be effectively delivered in stroke rehabilitation and community-based contexts. Her work has been funded by the National Institute of Health, AOTF, and the University of Minnesota's Clinical and Translational Scientific Institute. Her presentation is titled, Building Interventions to Promote Physically Active Lifestyles After Stroke, an interdisciplinary endeavor. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Kringle. Please save your answers until the question and answer session at the end. So we'll have the talks and then there will be time for questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I am going to. All right, can everyone hear me? All right. I am really grateful to be here today and honored to have an opportunity to share a bit about my work with you. And want to thank the American OT Foundation for this opportunity and this recognition, along with my nominator who is in the room today, Bess Skidmore, and also along with Joy Hamill and Susan Magacy. I subtitled this talk an interdisciplinary endeavor because I hope that over the next 15 to 20 minutes, you'll see how, to be able to share how collaborating and working with interdisciplinary colleagues has really enriched the work that I do and also has kind of elevated the voice of occupational therapy within those spaces and those fields as well. You heard a little bit about my funding already. I want to start us off with what seems on the surface like a relatively simple question. What is physical activity? And there's actually a pretty complex answer to that question, is that it depends. It depends on who you ask. When I talk about physical activity with my public health colleagues, they almost immediately point me to the World Health Organization's physical activity guidelines or to the American Heart Association's physical activity guidelines for stroke survivors. They're thinking about physical activity at the level of physical activity that we should all be striving for to impact public health. When I talk with my health education colleagues, which is the space where most of the physical activity research exists, they often point me to physical activity frameworks that help us to really define the types of physical activity that people are engaging in, and also the patterns of physical activity that we accumulate physical activity in over the course of the day. It's a little bit small on the slide here. A lot of the language in some of their frameworks is not too dissimilar from the language that we use in occupational therapy. They talk about leisure time physical activity. They talk about occupation-based physical activity, and in this case, they do mean work. They also talk about physical activity that's accumulated over the course of our instrumental daily activities and in transport, walking, biking to get to the places that we need to go. Within the field of health education, physical activity researchers have moved towards a framework of 24-hour movement and non-movement behaviors. So they're acknowledging that complex interplay between physical activity levels, sedentary behavior or sitting time, and sleep, acknowledging that the amount or the patterns in which we engage in one of these areas directly affects how we engage in the other areas. Exercise physiologists are also very interested in physical activity. And when I talk with my exercise physiology colleagues, they're really interested in how human movement impacts health and physiological processes. So they're interested in not just exercise, but also how varying intensities of activity impact things like cardiometabolic and cardiovascular health, body composition, brain health, and physical fitness or cardiorespiratory fitness. When I talk with my rehabilitation colleagues, our conversation often really centers on home exercise programs and early mobilization. My team was really interested in understanding a little bit more about how occupational therapy and physical therapy practitioners think about and implement physical activity guidelines within their work with stroke survivors. And we recently conducted a national survey of over 750 occupational and physical therapy practitioners. And we asked them, how familiar are you with the American Heart Association guidelines specifically for stroke survivors? And we learned that only about 65% of practitioners felt that they were knowledgeable about these guidelines. We also broke down the guidelines and asked them about each of the specific types of physical activity that's named within the guidelines. And we learned that among these practitioners, they were most familiar with early mobilization, neuro training, and strength training. And they were least familiar with aerobic exercise recommendations and flexibility or stretching recommendations. One of the interesting things about our findings is that there was no difference between physical and occupational therapists. So I think as occupational therapists, we sometimes think, oh, that's physical therapy's domain. But broadly in rehab, physical activity maybe doesn't get as much attention in some of the lifestyle-related types of physical activity. As occupational therapists, we have a really important role to play in physical activity. If we think back to the health education frameworks that talk about 24-hour movement and non-movement behavior patterns, every single activity that our clients are setting goals around, that they're working towards, can be mapped somewhere within this framework, right? The activities that our clients, that our patients are engaged in, fits within this framework and is part of their day-to-day accumulation of physical activity. We also know that physical activity is very important after stroke for health and for function. Over 80% of stroke survivors have one or more of the chronic conditions listed here on the slide: heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, mood disorders, or COPD. And each of these conditions can be impacted in part by physical activity. We also know that physical activity is important for functional outcomes, things like fall risk, protecting against cognitive decline, increasing life satisfaction, or health-related quality of life. And even with this knowledge, stroke survivors still struggle to achieve recommended levels of physical activity. We know that on average, stroke survivors accumulate 9 to 11 hours per day of sedentary time, and roughly 1 in 3 engage in at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity activity each day. If we think about physical activity in terms of accumulating step counts, only about 1 in 4 people with stroke achieve 6,500 or more steps per day, which is less than the physical activity recommendations. My research team is works towards developing interventions that help people with stroke engage in or re-engage in physically active lifestyles. And to do this, we use a model for intervention development called the ORBIT model. The ORBIT model is an intervention developed framework that grew out of the field of health psychology and is an iterative process that helps us to really sit in that early phase intervention refinement, development, and preliminary testing so that we can arrive at phase 3 efficacy or effectiveness trials confident that our protocols are well defined, that they're robust, and that they're likely to produce the outcomes that we're aiming to achieve. Within the ORBIT model, every intervention research project or program begins with a significant clinical question. And the clinical question that I'm going to use as our kind of exemplar over the next kind of part of my talk here is, how can we effectively reduce sitting or sedentary time after stroke? This is where we started when we started to develop the ABLE intervention. ABLE is a behavioral activation-based intervention that is designed to reduce post-stroke sedentary time using engagement in personally meaningful activities. Behavioral activation was originally designed and tested in the field of psychiatry to reduce depressive symptoms through facilitating engagement in valued, meaningful activities. And so when we were kind of on the hunt for when we're on the search for what are some ways that may effectively reduce sedentary time, we started thinking a lot about the role of meaningful activities and saw some alignment between these two protocols. We needed to define what this actually looked like. So when we were adapting this intervention, we needed to design a study that would allow us to deliver the intervention to a small handful of people and then make tweaks or adjustments to it to refine that intervention protocol. And this is ORBIT phase 1, define the intervention process. Our descriptive case series included only 5 people, and it resulted in an intervention manual that we were then ready to apply within larger groups of patients in our future studies. Within ORBIT phase 1B, this is really focusing on refinement. And intervention refinement can look a lot of different ways, and we can ask a lot of different questions about how we refine interventions. I'm just going to show you a couple of examples here of studies that have helped us to think a little bit and refine this ABLE intervention process. One of the things that we were acutely aware of is that there may be missing components in our intervention, and we wanted to better understand that lived experience of sedentary time and movement behaviors in people with stroke. And we carried out a mixed method study where our participants looked at their activity tracking data, and they reflected back on what types of activities they were doing during times they were more and less active. Within this study, we learned a bit about the differences between people with high and low sedentary time in how they approached the barriers in their environment. People with more sedentary time talked about barriers and they kind of stopped there. People with less sedentary time said, yeah, there are barriers, and here's the solution that I took to resolve that barrier. And so that affirmed for us that the collaborative problem-solving piece of ABLE was important and valuable, and that we should continue with that. We also paid particular attention to how people talked about the role of their social support in their activities. People with more sedentary time talked about their social support persons as providing help. So a very tangible kind of traditional caregiver type of relationship where they gave me a ride somewhere or they helped me physically make sure that I didn't fall. Our people with less sedentary time talked about doing their activities with other people and receiving encouragement and accountability within their social networks. And this relationship, the way they talked about the other people, was very reciprocal. And so this actually led to a branch off of research that I'm not going to have time to talk about today, but that AOTF funded that really helped us start to move towards a dyadic model of this type of approach that's really important. So we can use the refinement stage to identify some other intervention elements or additional types of approaches that might be effective. And we can also use the refine phase to shift the modality by which we're delivering behavioral interventions. And we did that in this study that explored strategies to support remote intervention delivery for stroke survivors. I did my postdoc starting in 2019, and I didn't have much time before the COVID-19 pandemic started. And so that really forced us to think very seriously about how we could deliver ABLE remotely. And I was fortunate at the time to be collaborating with Carolyn Baum and Beth Skidmore and Joy Hamill on a different intervention project where their participants had signed up intending to participate in this in-person intervention, and the intervention process got shifted to remote delivery. So we had a group of participants that didn't sign up for a telehealth study because they were confident in their technology. We had participants that were open to trying it because of the situation. And so that allowed us an opportunity to understand those experiences and how we could support people who are maybe a little bit less confident in their technology use in engaging in intervention. And this has resulted kind of indirectly in adjustments to the ABLE intervention protocol as we shifted that intervention remote. As we continue to move through the orbit model, we also moved into phase 2. So the proof of concept part of ABLE part of orbit asks a couple different questions. One is, can we deliver this intervention? Is it feasible? And 2 is, can this intervention produce clinically meaningful change on an outcome? And so we've actually run 2 studies that align with this phase. And in these studies, these are often single-arm pre-post test studies. Everybody that enrolls in the study gets the intervention, and we measure outcomes at baseline and post-intervention. And we're not looking for a statistically significant change at this point. We're looking for a clinically meaningful amount of change that may be important in clinical practice. So on the left side of the screen, these are the findings from the ABLE study, which is published in AJOT, where our within group change from baseline in a sample of 21 stroke survivors with chronic stroke was a reduction of 56 minutes per day, which is more than the 30 minutes per day reduction that we consider clinically meaningful. On the right side of the screen, these are the findings from our proof of concept study of the remotely delivered version of ABLE. And these are all stroke survivors within their first year post-stroke. And we saw an increase in in activity retention more than 10%, which is what we consider to be clinically meaningful. Combined, the findings from these, in addition to the feasibility outcomes, which are reported in these papers, supported advancement to the first randomized trial of this intervention. So within Orbit phase 2B and 2C, this is the pilot randomized controlled trial where we're asking questions about the feasibility of carrying out this trial. We made an intentional decision in this work to deliver this whole protocol entirely remotely. And so we needed to test those procedures before we commit to a full-scale efficacy trial. This is also the first time that we're testing the effects of ABLE or tele-ABLE against a control group to see if we're producing a larger change than if they were to receive usual care. Our co-primary outcomes in this study are health-related quality of life and sedentary time, measured using a quality of life questionnaire, the EuroQual 5D5L, and the physical activity tracker that you can see pictured on the slide here, which is called an ActivePal. And we're also, our secondary outcomes, we're measuring activity engagement using the activity card sort 3, which Dr. Baum and her team allowed us access to as part of the beta testing of that tool. This study was funded by a K23 Career Development Award from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, and it is still ongoing. We started recruiting for this study in May of 2024, and I'm so happy to tell you that we finished enrolling our full sample in February of this year. Within this sample, our average age is 63, and our stroke participants are on average 5 months post-stroke. The final intervention session was actually delivered on Monday. And so I hope you'll stay tuned for the findings of this study, which we're really excited to share with you by the end of this year is the goal. In the meantime, I am so fortunate to have skilled trainees in my lab who are already digging into the baseline data and asking really important questions that are aligned with that refinement stage of the orbit model. Emily Shallett is the University of Minnesota's first OTD PhD student in their rehab science program, and she's exploring the role between the role of social connectedness and activity engagement. She'll be presenting these findings at the Occupational Therapy Summit of Scholars this summer. I also am fortunate to work with students enrolled in our graduate programs in kinesiology. And one of my graduate students, Rakoya Oladepo, is an internationally trained physiotherapist who is really interested in the psychological aspects of physical activity. And she's exploring the role of cognitive and fear avoidance in physical activity and activity engagement within these data. I also have trainees that are challenging us to think about implementation early in the intervention refine process. Amos Badu is also an internationally trained physiotherapist who is a PhD student in my lab, and he's particularly interested in how rehab practitioners implement the physical activity guidelines and also implementation context for community-based stroke support. So he, along with one of our undergraduate honors students, have played a big role in some of this work. And we're also starting to think a bit more about what physical activity looks like in community contexts and working with students on understanding recreational sports and return to recreational sports as a meaningful occupation. Over the course of my training, I started as an occupational therapist within an occupational therapy department. And as I've moved through my career, these interdisciplinary collaborations and interdisciplinary environments have really enriched how I view my work and how I identify, kind of deepened that identity as an occupational therapy scientist, while also often being the only occupational therapist in the room in some of these conversations. And so I adjusted my acknowledgement slide a little bit today to really highlight those fields that have been involved and contributed to this research. And I'm very excited to see how this research continues to progress in the future in collaboration with this team and the community collaborators that are listed on the slide. So I wanted to thank you for your attention, and I think we're holding questions until the end. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kringle. You have already made a remarkable contribution to the field of occupational therapy, and I am confident that you will continue to make a significant impact in the years to come. So congratulations. Our 2026 Mid-Career Research Excellent Awardee, Dr. Andrew Persch, is an associate professor in the Department of Occupational Therapy, director of the Transition, Employment, and Technology Lab at Colorado State University. Dr. Persch was a member of the AOTF Board of Trustees from 2023 to 2025. His research focuses on improving transitions to adulthood and employment for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Dr. Persch's work has been funded by the National Institute of Health, the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, the Social Security Administration, and various state and local organizations. His presentation is titled Supporting the Transition to Adulthood and Employment, Research, Innovation, and Impact. Please join me in congratulating our 2026 AOTF Mid-Career Research Excellent Awardee, Dr. Persch.
Thank you, Dr. Davies, and a pleasure to be with you all today. So I've been asked to share about my research journey and highlight some of our current projects. And so over the next 20 or so minutes, I'll tell you about the Vocational Fit Assessment and vocefit.com, tools that we've developed to support the transition to employment. I'll try to emphasize how we identified the need for these tools, the research and development activities we completed to build and sustain them over the past decade, and about the impact of this work. Before I go too far, I do want to disclose that we've been supported by a variety of funders at federal, state, and local levels, and I've included those that are relevant to the work that I'll talk about today. my views and opinions are my own and don't represent these agencies. I trained in occupational therapy at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and learned from some exceptional professors. Dr. Chris Barnico was my master's advisor and really gave my first research experience. Dr. Ginny Stoffel provided a model for what professional servant leadership looked like, and Dr. Roger Smith as a model for high-level occupational therapy research. I entered practice in Madison, Wisconsin as a school-based and pediatric OT. I worked with children at all different age levels, but gravitated towards working with adolescents and at the high school level. And it's working with this group where I recognize the challenges that youth and young adults with disabilities face after transition as they move into adult life. I became involved in volunteer leadership with the Wisconsin Occupational Therapy Association and was a member of the 2010 Emerging Leaders Development Program, where I explored what a career in research might look like working with Dr. Brent Braveman. And these early experiences brought me to The Ohio State University for my PhD. I was seeking a mentor in pediatric OT and connected with Dr. Jane K. Smith, who is well known as the editor of Occupational Therapy for Children. I was also looking for someone who would support my interests in transition age youth with disabilities. Jane brought us to the first OT Summit of Scholars, and that made me feel connected to the larger OT research community from very early on in my training. Admittedly, Jane had focused most of her career on younger children, but after 30 years in OT, she was beginning to recognize that after all the intensive and early intervention, the good therapy that we provide to children, many still struggle after transition to adulthood. And so she was inclined to support someone like me who had an interest in this area. An outward indicator of her shift in thinking was how the title of the book changed between the 6th and 7th edition. And so Occupational Therapy for Children and Adolescents was the next edition. So beyond Jane's expertise in pediatric OT, Ohio State offered the opportunity to participate in the Transition Options in Post-Secondary Settings program. TOPS was part of a U.S. Department of Education funded grant program that supported the development of transition programs within higher education. TOPS students completed courses and participated in the campus community. They also gained meaningful work experiences. As OTs, we know that work is associated with better health, quality of life, supports the development of self-esteem and social networks, provides a sense of belonging and security, increased socioeconomic status, and reduced poverty. And it's this meaningful work experiences piece that we were tasked with helping. So to provide that part of the program, we adapted the Project Search model, which is a gold standard transition to employment program for young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, traditionally delivered within the context of high school special education during the last year of IDEA eligibility. Project Search is a collaborative partnership between employers, schools, vocational rehabilitation, and developmental disability systems. And these stakeholders collaborate to provide intensive career development and internship experiences focused on an outcome of competitive integrated employment for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Project Search students participate in a functional academic curriculum and also spend much of their day completing internships. And so we endeavored to match our top students with internships, volunteer, and paid work experiences at Ohio State and throughout the greater Columbus community. And a number of questions arose. How do we match interns to internships? Or how do we match workers to jobs? What are the best options for job development or for job placement? How are these decisions made, and what tools are available? My first dissertation study sought to shed some light on job matching for people with IDD. We found that job matching is a collaborative process, that stakeholders consider many different types of data, but that practices are highly variable and lacked consistency. Further, the outcomes of job matching were poorly defined. And so these findings revealed the need for a new measure and more consistent practices that could optimize job matching. We found that few tools were available to inform job matching and employment decision-making. Those that were available did consider person abilities, interests, and preferences, and some would match to prototypical jobs. No measures offered the ability to assess a person and real-world jobs at the same time. We also realized that a paper and pencil assessment would not be sufficient. We would need technology to integrate information on many jobs all at once and organize it for human decision-making. Our instrument development process began with a secondary analysis of the National Longitudinal Transition Study 2. And this enabled us to identify the most common jobs performed by young adults with disabilities in the years after high school. These data were coded with the Bureau of Labor Statistics standard occupational classifications. And this allowed us to identify the essential job duties for all of these jobs using the Occupational Information Network. And we used these duties to develop our candidate items. Our content validity testing included expert review and lots of pilot testing and revisions. And this became my dissertation and the focus of my work over the last 15 years. Some of this is cut off. The vocational fit assessment has 11 different subscales and 133 items. We have validated the VFA using a variety of techniques: factor analysis, Roche analysis, and rater reliability studies. Our measurement model brings a novel approach to job matching. It is something that is systematic and data-driven and analytical. VFA items combine three components: an instructional prompt, a common item stem, and a customized rating scale. And there are two versions. The VFA worker is an assessment of worker abilities, and the VFA job assesses job demands. The instructional prompt tailors the item to its application. The VFA worker instructional prompt reads, "To what degree does the worker demonstrate?" And the VFA job prompt reads, "To what degree does the job demand?" Next, the common item stems are the same for both the VFA worker and the VFA job. And so here we see the stem, the ability to communicate face-to-face with other people, is the same for both versions. Finally, a customized rating scale is applied for each version. The VFA worker uses a 3-point scale of ability: high, some, and low ability. The VFA job uses a 3-point scale of job demand: high, some, and low demand. So with the VFA, we capture information about workers' personal abilities and, in parallel, a job's environmental and occupational demands. I hope you see the PEO model emerging here. Collecting this data is important, but making sense of it is equally important. And so let's consider a couple scenarios. Suppose a job has a high demand for the ability to communicate face-to-face with other people, and the worker demonstrates high ability. This is good. It reflects a match of abilities and demands, and we call this a PRO, the relative advantages of a job match. Consider another scenario. The job still has high demand for the ability to communicate face-to-face with other people, but now the worker is rated as having low ability. This is not bad, but it does reflect a mismatch between abilities and demands. We call this a con, the relative disadvantages of a job match. So between the pros and cons, we've articulated a set of decision rules that help to make sense of vocational fit assessment data. In fact, we call this the data, the demands and abilities transforming algorithm. And it helps employment specialists make decisions about job matches and the needed employment supports. There are a few different ways to think about and use VFA data. First, suppose you're placing a young adult in employment and you're looking for the best possible match, or they will experience success on day one. You'll select the job all the way on the right there, where most of the skills show up in green, reflecting more fit. But perhaps you're not ready for placement and you're focused on building skills. You select the leftmost job where the fit is lower and there's more opportunity to develop these skills. We also use VocaFit to demonstrate growth over time. A project search student typically completes a series of 3 internships, and we can quantify that growth using VocaFit. With our measurement model and algorithms in place, we endeavored to build VocaFit.com. This is where we administer the VFA and where users generate reports to support their decision making. We worked with a local IT vendor, designed a custom web application, and launched it in 2016. 500 users signed up that first summer, and Dr. Dennis Cleary up here in the upper left has been my partner in this work over the past decade. VocaFit found a home in supporting transition to adulthood and employment in special education and voc rehab settings. A group in Kansas liked it so much that they funded a Spanish translation so that they could use it more with their agricultural workforce. The vocational fingerprint was an essential component of our job matching reports. Here you see the comparison of one worker and 4 different jobs. The visual enables quick comparisons to see which jobs look like good matches and which ones look like they might be more challenging. The data are transparent to the user, who can click on these graphs to explore the data. The user can see how the algorithm sorted the skills, and providers use this information to develop their intervention plans. If we want our client to be successful on this or that job, we need to develop a plan to address the skills in their areas of need. In 2019, VocaFit had grown to 2,300 users, and we were successful in obtaining R01 funding from NICHD. This was a multi-site, multiple PI project to evaluate VFA psychometrics. You'll see Dennis in the front row there, along with my MPIs, Dr. Jessica Kramer from the University of Florida and Dr. Beth Pfeiffer from Temple University, AOTF chair, and my CSU colleague, Dr. Patti Davies, was a co-investigator on the project, as was Dr. James Graham. We recruited 319 young adults with intellectual disabilities and followed them for up to 2.5 years through their transition to employment. Overall, our findings reaffirm the reliability and validity of VFA subscales. We did, of course, identify a few items and scales that would benefit from revision. While our internal consistency and intra-rater reliability remained high, we found that inter-rater reliability was lower than anticipated. And we attribute this to the differences in how parents, teachers, job coaches, and therapists may rate worker ability. And so this reveals a need for us to improve our training materials and administrative guidelines. Responsiveness to change was difficult to estimate because we did not control the employment interventions or experiences of our participants while they were in the study. Nonetheless, we were able to generate usable MCIDs for future research and clinical use. Our ROC area under the curve values were low, reflecting only modest predictive power for predicting employment outcomes. And that reflects the complexity of trying to predict employment outcomes among young adults with intellectual disabilities. Our multi-level models showed significant time effects for multiple subscales and differences by service settings, and particularly for project search, which outperformed special education and other vocational rehabilitation settings. During the course of our grant, VoCFIT usage grew 10x. Of those that participated in our study, more than 90% rated the VFA and VoCFIT reports as appropriate, accessible, and acceptable. Practicability was slightly lower, around 80%, due to implementation issues and some pieces about website design. Our algorithm achieved about 81% accuracy, high sensitivity, and you'll see low specificity, and that raises an eyebrow. This low specificity reflects a scenario where job demands are high and the worker has some ability. And admittedly, our participants rated that as a mismatch. However, our algorithm actually supports matching in that scenario, favoring the potential of the person to learn the skill, to develop the capacity, and succeed in the job that they want. We also took some initial efforts to develop a vocational fit a VFA self-report, and those efforts were positively received. As a follow-along, we received funding from the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities, and this allowed us to make many of the changes that we identified in the R01. We updated the website to improve performance, design, and the user experience. We enhanced the VFA data collection tool and utilities to track progress. We made it easier to identify strengths and needs, to track pre-post change at both the subscale and at the item level. We created a tool for setting job goals, which allows users to monitor the development of skills over the course of treatment. So here you can see the client has improved their match for their desired job from pre to post. And with this tool, we can keep our eye on the prize, helping the client move towards their goal, even when they're not working in that job. When they're training in other jobs or other settings, we can ensure we're helping them get to where they want. We expanded our tools for career exploration with a discovery job bank that now includes over 270 jobs. Created filters that allow users to tailor reports and filter those reports based on their client's interests and preferences. And we added links to other career exploration tools and to job boards. We've incorporated AI, and this has been pretty exciting. It allows us to explore job matches in greater depth. Using the VFA data as an input, de-identified data, just the assessment data, we can identify best fit matches. We can prioritize which skills to learn and ask the AI to suggest intervention strategies so that we can teach those skills. And we keep finding new ways to make use of this data. So over more than a decade, this work has progressed from a local project to a PhD dissertation to a custom web app, an NIH R01, and now growing national and international impact. VoCFIT has more than 25,000 users, and they represent more than 2,300 unique employment service organizations. We have users in all 50 states and 15 countries, and the partnership with Project Search helps to extend VOCFIT's reach even further. Moving forward, we have work to do to optimize the VFA and VOCFIT based on the rich data resulting from the R01. There's more to do. We've been fortunate to build and maintain these tools with grant funds, but it will take more to sustain them over time. And so partnership with Project Search opens some new opportunities to think about commercialization. And we're also excited to transform the VFA into a self-report version. We learned a lot working with Jessica Kramer on the PD Pro and the value of a self-report tool for youth and young adults with IDD. And I'm pleased to share that our first article on the VFA self-report is in press with archives right now. So thank you for listening. So many mentors have contributed to my development and the success and impact of this work. More than I can mention, but I'm especially grateful to those at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and MD Anderson Cancer Center, Colorado State University, The Ohio State University, Cincinnati Children's Hospital, University of Florida, and Temple University. And also very grateful to the almost 30 students that have contributed as members of the TET Lab, particularly Dr. Christina Parsons, who first worked with us on VOCFIT at Ohio State, continued that as a PhD student at Colorado State, and is now an independent scientist in her own right at the VA in Denver. Finally, I'd like to thank my friends and colleagues who nominated me for this award, for all of you for coming and learning a bit about my journey. I'm truly honored and grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Persch. Your innovative and significant contributions to the field of occupational therapy and individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, their families, their teachers, their clinicians, you've already made a huge impact. So thank you for that. And we look forward to see how your research continues to shape and inspire our field. So thank you for your contributions. Please join me again in congratulating our 2026 Early Career and Mid-Career Research Excellence Awardees, Drs. Emily Kringle and Andrew Persch. Established in 2025, the AOTF Lifetime Achievement Award recognizes an individual who has significantly impacted occupational therapy research and made significant service-based and financial contributions to the foundation. It is with great honor I introduce the 2026 AOTF Lifetime Achievement Awardee, Dr. Carolyn Baum. Congratulations. Dr. Baum is Professor Emeritus of Occupational Therapy, Neurology, and Social Work at Washington University in St. Louis. Dr. Baum has held prominent leadership positions with the Foundation, the American Congress of Rehabilitation Medicine, and has served twice as board president for the American Occupational Therapy Association. She has also served as board president for the American Occupational Therapy Certification Board, now MBCOT. Dr. Baum was inducted into the Academy of Research in 2008. Her research has been funded by National Institute of Health, the National Institute on Disability Independent Living and Rehabilitation Research, and the James S. McDonald Foundation. She was instrumental in securing initial funding for the AOTF Intervention Research Grant Program and is currently working to endow the Carolyn Baum Cognitive Function in Daily Life Mentor Award. Dr. Baum's clinical interests are in the area of aging, occupational performance assessment, and program development. Her research focuses on the role of cognition in everyday life and the enabling of everyday performance in people with chronic health conditions and disability. Her presentation is titled An Occupational Therapy Scientist's Journey to Understand How Cognition Supports Daily Life. Please join me in congratulating our 2026 Lifetime Achievement Awardee, Dr. Carolyn Baum, who will present her career journey in occupational therapy and research work.
Well, I am very, very honored to receive this award. I'm honored to see so many people here that have mentored me and continue to help me grow, and many students that keep me thinking. And I think I was just thinking about this as I was listening to both our presenters. Occupational therapy was the fit for me, and I am blessed with a lot of experiences over 60 years. What I want to tell you today is I'm going to take you through 3 major initiatives that made it possible for me to understand why occupation has finally produced the scientists that make it possible for us to address our originators' hypotheses. And it's just such a privilege to see this happening, because Adolf Meyer, in his philosophy of occupation, told us that he came from psychology to the OTs that had founded the profession and said that your work is to help people maintain and balance themselves in a world of reality and actuality by being in active life and active use. That was a principle. He was trying to get the science to move behind that, and that was nearly over 100 years ago. Then we have, I have to tell you that my first 12 years as a professional in occupational therapy, I was very active in AOTA and very engaged in getting organizational systems and planning. My mentors were Mary Riley, Wilma West, Ruth Brunyett, and Gail Fiedler. So I'm the generation that's the age of many of you. I was the privileged person to be able to take from their challenges the questions and what they were telling us we needed to do. And Mary Riley's, all of us, we say this all the time. Every student knows that Mary Riley told us that man, through the use of his hands as they are energized by mind and will, can influence the state of their own health. And Gail Fiedler told us that occupation is a valuable vehicle to acquire, maintain, or develop skills, and they're necessary and they're distinguishable actions that elicit measurable behaviors, and we can use them to learn skills. That's how I thought about OT. So one day, when I had gone to WashU, I was the director of the OT program, and I went to WashU, and there were 5 OTs in the entire Children's Hospital and Barnes Hospital systems. and we had to figure out how to build OT as a profession, and people had to go on vacation, and so I would go up to the neurology floor to cover for people while they were on vacation, and I was very strangely aware that when I was up there for a week that there was this person staring at me, and I was sort of uncomfortable about it at first, and finally he walked over to me and he said, "How do you get people to do things that I don't think they can do?" And this person was Leonard Berg, who was the head of the first memory and aging project in the Alzheimer's Research Center movements in the United States. And I said, "I learned it in school. I know that I'm supposed to help people do things by doing things they need and want to do. And I know that I can break down tasks and I can help them," just what my colleagues, my mentors had told me. He said, "Well, that's all well and good. Why don't you go to the library and see what science is supporting that?" I went to the library, became good friends with the librarian. We searched absolutely high and low through the literature to see what helping people do motivated, meaningful tasks and creating the environment and structuring the tasks. What we found was anybody that had a cognitive loss was a burden to society, a burden to family, and they were primarily geared toward institutionalization. And he came back and I reported to him, and I said, the science isn't there that I can find. And he said, "Then you've got work to do." And I said, "Oh my God, I don't even have science. I didn't have my master's degree. I didn't have my doctoral degree. I wasn't a scientist." And he said, "Well, you've got work to do." So I said, "I don't have the skills. I don't have the research background." He said, "I'll find you some help." Well, many of you in this room know Dr. Dorothy Edwards. She had just graduated in psychology of aging at Washington University. And Dr. Edwards was hired to work with me to put together what needed to be done to answer this question. So I'm going to take you through 3 journeys and what we did. Okay, so he and Michael Brook from the Rehab Institute, because we were writing 2 grants, one on independent living and one on how to identify the capacity of individuals with cognitive loss to live, function. And we became partners, and the first thing we did was lay out the questions we had to answer. What do people do? What do they do now? What have they done in the past? How much help do they need? What behaviors do their caregivers observe? What memories problems do they have? Is the caregiver a burden? Do they need skills? All these things we needed to figure out, because somebody with a cognitive problem can't do it on their own if they're in a deteriorating state of cognitive function. So here they had already started the Memory and Aging Project with psychologists, and they had their first funding and were going in for a second funding, which they brought us into. So Dorothy and I had the equivalent of an R01 to do our initial work in this. And so we found out that they already had the clinical dementia rating, the short blessed, the Barthel, the memory behavior problem checklist, and the Zurich burden interview. But we needed to know, what help do they need to perform a task? The kitchen task assessment, we built it. What did they do before? What are their overlearned skills? The activity card sort, we built it. And the functional behavior profile. What do they see at home in terms of the person's capacity to perform? And can we see if it alters the functional behavior profile? So we started collecting data. Well, I should say that when we got the original data, the psychologists on the team wanted us to take everything to the mean, and we were seeing variance. And we needed to do some additional work. And so I felt incompetent. It was like I didn't have any of the skills. So by this time I was 45 years old, and I had to go get my PhD so I could do the analysis on the data that we were collecting. And I did. But it wasn't just that I had to get my PhD, I had to be able to do structured equation modeling. And so they said, what math have you had? And I said, I had geometry in high school 25 years ago. Well, you need calculus and you need linear algebra. So I found a professor at WashU who wanted me to do the work so badly because his mother-in-law had Alzheimer's disease that he took me on to teach me calculus and linear algebra, and I have 2 A's on my college transcript. So anyway, fast forward, data collected, 104 couples. This is my first answer to Dr. Berg. And that what we learned in testing these people was that memory deficits were not the be-all of why people can't function. We learned that executive functions were a critical role in enabling the occupational engagement of the person. And when a person was kept active in their overlearned skills that didn't require executive function, they had higher levels of basic self-care, and they had fewer disturbing behaviors. And we found out it was the disturbing behaviors that was causing the emotional stress and demand stress in the caregivers. It makes sense. When do you as a parent get really upset? It's when your kid's acting out. Well, people who have cognitive loss don't have the higher skills to process the sensory input that's coming in. And if the caregiver doesn't understand how to get them into things they've done in routines, they don't keep them active. But keeping a person with really severe cognitive loss active is a really critical factor. And breaking down the tasks and doing all the things that we do is central to answering Dr. Berg's question, is how do you let them do things? Because you cue them, but you have to teach caregivers to cue them. Okay, so that was number one. But in the process of doing this analysis, this is the beginning of the aha of, yes, OT is important, occupation is important, but I showed the data between the correlations of the neuropsych tests and the performance-based test of the EF. It was the kitchen desk assessment at that moment. It's turned into the EFPT, and it's about to turn into something else. The relationship between the neuropsych tests, a psychologist said, my God, Carolyn, you've got a performance-based test of executive function, when the correlations appeared out of the data that came out from the psychologist and me. So this particular, you've got a new tool. You've got something that's performance-based. So that took me to the next step. So I became friends after I was at NIH I was on the first committee that wrote the rehab plan for Congress for the NCMRR. And so I got to know a lot of people there. This is back in the late 80s. And Danuta Krutowski introduced me to Susan Fitzpatrick, who was coming to St. Louis to be the director of the James S. McDonald Foundation. And I started going to dinner and lunch with her to introduce her to St. Louis, and I was telling her about my work. And from our personal conversations, cognitive neuroscience was only being really developed formally in the 1980s. You know, neuroscience really only started, their first meeting was in 1976. So we were like just trying to figure out, well, how does rehab get access to the information that's coming out of neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience? And so lo and behold, one day I get an email from the James S. McDonald Foundation that says they have a new planning grant. How do we generate knowledge from cognitive neuroscience to improve the everyday lives of people with brain injury? So I got all the people from WashU, talk about interdisciplinary, all the people from the Memory and Aging Project, all the scientists from psychology and from the neuroscience, philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology program together, and we looked at what we could do and decided we were going to apply for a planning grant. But the interesting thing about it, Mark Rakel, who developed the PET scan, was in that meeting. And what happened was that I said, I haven't finished my PhD. Who wants to be the PI of this project? I don't think I can do it. Mark Rakel said, Carolyn Baum, you're the only person that can do it because you're the only person that will keep us focused on everyday life. Everybody else had their own science, and we have to do something new. You must do it. So I did. So we got, over a 10-year period, we got over $6 million to form the Cognitive Rehabilitation Research Group at Washington University School of Medicine. And it was neuroscientists, neurologists, OT scientists, PT science, and speech language scientists. And I was able to lead this group with Alexander Dromarek. He was the medical director of stroke, and I was the director of the OT program. And our efforts together generated some pretty important work. And what we did is that we had to build a language that we could communicate with each other because nobody knew each other's languages, and it was really hard. And we wanted to build a clinical core of data, which would have the ability to generate pilot rehab trials and measurement development and brain structure function relationships. And so we built a core where all of the patients admitted to Barnes-Jewish Hospital with stroke were entered into this core with a database that we put together that had lesions, stroke severity, economic status, premorbid disability, premorbid ADLs, language, attention. Then we built what cognitive constructs we really wanted to understand. And you can see here, executive function, memory, processing speed, inhibition, all these things. But we put in all the daily life things: daily living, participation, psychosocial capabilities, executive performance, and environmental support. So over that period of time that we had that funding and got clean data, because we had to build this system so that it could be generated with all the clinical data from the hospital and all of our work, we had 7,217 people that had been admitted to stroke. This database still exists, and there's over 30,000 people in it now. And so it leads itself to answering some really important questions, and I'll tell you some of the studies that came out of that. But I'm just going to show you that Dorothy Edwards and I got, and then Lisa Connor joined us. She was a cognitive psychologist that came to OT and never left. Move it up. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I've gotten shorter and I forget. But we discovered that people even that are excluded from rehab have mild strokes and have cognitive impairments. And the kinds of problems they have in their daily life, after they've gone home, 62% had decreases in work, 36% decrease in social activity, only 26% went actually back to their prior level of activity, and 35% of them received no rehab. And what kind of problems did they have? Ambulation, communication, emotional well-being, ADL problems, memory and attention, household management, social interaction, and mobility problems in mild strokes. So that's the population of people that we could be doing amazing things with. And so I'm going to just show you some of these things. We also had the lesions of the brain where the stroke occurred, and actually, let's see, I've skipped a slide here, but only out of 7,000 people did 344 people have a single lesion stroke. So they'd had TIAs, they'd had prior strokes, they'd had all kinds of things, so that thinking about neuroanatomy and thinking they had a stroke in one area of their brain, their lives have been discombobulated by a lot of neurological insults over time that make it very difficult. And daily activities are upset, particularly in deep hemisphere, non-frontal, frontal, everywhere. So we needed to do something about it. So during this 10-year period, we piloted work for 3 NIH R01s, and some of them have been Dromerick's big early treatment of motor recovery trial came out of that. Maurizio Corbetta's work on visual inattention and neglect came out of that. And our work on early stroke came out of that. But more than that, this database we built is the basis of the Brain Behavior and Performance Services of our ICTS, which is the Translational Center at WashU, and just so many other things that really happened. But what we learned was that we had a relationship between neuroscience and everyday life, and that we had a way to communicate with scientists to do that. And we did a lot of work on our own measures of functional cognition, activity, participation, and interventions. So as our goal was to link neuroscience to everyday life over the decade, it was very successful in doing that. And I have to tell you, about 6 months ago, I was at fitness, riding the bicycle after I'd done my exercises, and I got a phone call, and Washington University Medical School was putting together a profile or a display of all of the scientists that had contributed to neuroscience at Washington University, and they were including my work. And even beyond that, they chose me to give the lecture to open the experience of the display, because they said you took basic science and component understanding of cognition and put it into a usable framework for how neuroscience can be applied through rehabilitation. So right now, it's kind of funny. I don't know, do you ever hear of the scientist Rita Levi-Montalcini that developed the growth hormone factor that got the Nobel Prize? I'm in the same shadow box as she is. It's kind of like, okay, OT, we're there. Stop forgetting. Stop worrying about people. We just have to use what we know. Okay, so here I've got to hurry, but I wanted to tell you that Alan Heinemann at the Research Institute of Chicago changed OT's life when he called me and said, we're going to validate the NIH toolbox in people with neurological damage. Would you join us and use your performance-based test? So all the gold standard neuropsych tests, the NIH toolbox, and the EFPT were in a study of 600 people. So you don't get funding for something like that, but it was there because it was possible. And so we had 600 community residents with neurological conditions, stroke, head injury, and spinal cord injury. Spinal cord injury, most all have mild, if not moderate, cognitive problems. And we were going to validate this. To make a long story short, we had the data to do some pretty sophisticated modeling, and traditionally neuropsych has been in the constructs of fluid cognition and crystallized cognition, and functional cognition, which is the initiation, organization, sequencing, judgment, and completion of a task, which is what the EFPT measures, came out as a third general cognitive construct, which is the construct of the performance of the task. It's where sequencing gets picked up a lot. So we thought the EFPT was a performance executive function test. Executive functions in the fluid category of cognition. The planning, but not the doing. So it correlates with executive function, but it is an individual construct that Gail Fiedler kept yelling at us about. The doing, the breaking the task down. So I had a PhD student that wanted to do neural network work. And so we had, from this huge sample of 600 people with daily life experiences living in the community, where we were validating the toolbox. And what it showed was that each of the constructs, the crystallized cognition, which is the verbal and the past experience, and the fluid, which is the processing speed and where's working memory and inhibitory control come, is all of them, including the functional of judgment, sequencing, organization, and initiation and completion, are really central. This is why we need to focus on functional cognition, because all these cognitive constructs in the brain are what is supporting people's capacity to function in their daily lives. And I've found that we have put so much emphasis on sensory and so much on motor, and we really haven't realized that the sensory information coming in has to be processed and purposefully placed into the performance of the task at the level that makes it possible for the motor responses to be there. And so why I'm really excited about this, because we've learned so much more about cognition, because people have to maintain attention and suppress irrelevant information and monitor success of the strategy and plan strategically and correct errors and make judgments and organize and sequence the task. It takes it all. The sensory input has to be cognitively processed in order for the motor behavior to be successful. And we've been working with engineering, and when I saw this first, I thought, oh my God, Gail Fiedler, you were so right. But the engineers we're working with on a project had us break down the kitchen task assessment, basically the cooking task. There are 31 steps in it. And it's sensory, and it's cognitive, and it's motor. So why we just really haven't been paying enough attention to when the person's cognitive capacity to do. So why should we? Conditions known to have cognitive issues are metabolic. They're rampant in cancer and COPD and cardiac conditions and diabetes and developmental disorders and autism and aging and certainly depression and schizophrenia and alcohol abuse. We teach it in our schools mostly for head injury. Mild stroke. It has to be given a really strong position in understanding how any intervention we do, the person has to be able to learn it. And so when I was asked, I'm just going to skip that, but I was asked to do, how does cognition link with everyday life for this lecture? And so I went back to look at neuroscience principles because I hadn't thought about them for a long time. And I started reading them. And everyday activities offer the opportunity for neural networks to change their connections to foster development and recovery. Activities offer co-activation, repetition with progressive challenges, and goal-directed practice. Personally chosen activities are motivating to enable modulated gating in the brain. Activities sculpt specific circuits to support learning, to sequence information, working memory. Experience and environment shape the brain's structure and function. That's what we do. But we have to know that we're doing it. And so we need to use occupational therapy interventions that use neuroscience principles. And really, you've got co-op, you've got multi-context, you've got guided discovery, you've got problem-solving discovery. There's so many interventions that go back to these very basic things that support the brain. And so when I was introduced at this lecture, the man introducing me said that the neurologists didn't used to have a way to treat people. And now there's people that understand this. We understand it. So there is a role for us to play in a much bigger position. And that's why if somebody needs a cognitive screening in the hospital, if they've had an anesthesia, they may not be even aging. Sometimes it takes you 3-4 months to get over an anesthetic. In the meantime, they're falling and they're having problems. So we really need to think more about this OT thing. So what do people need to do? We need to do our requirements of life. And they go from self-care and meal planning and paying bills and driving and parenting and relationships. That's who these people are that come to us for service. They have been living lives, or they're trying to live lives, and they have they have to relearn the things that are going to reestablish the tracks in their brain that are going to be able for them to do it. I have a neighbor that was a concert piano player, and she could not play her piano. And I sat down with her and I said, let's start with scales. Just make your fingers work. You should hear now. Make your fingers work. And there was one situation, we were on a grant, and this actor had a stroke, and his brother-in-law came in the room and said, man, you got to get rid of that droop or you're never going to get a part again. And the guy said, I'm going to fix it. He went out and bought a bag of balloons. And he made that person blow those balloons up, sitting in his hospital room to get the mouth movements, and he got his face back. I mean, we know this, but we don't help people understand it themselves, that they have to go through recovery and they have to be active and engaged. So what do we have to do? We have to use daily tasks for therapy requiring because they require learning following neurological problems. Sitting with something that doesn't transfer, what are they motivated to do? They've got to do what they want to do. And we have to help them because they have to do it over and over and over. So I looked at all the OT interventions that have been really developed. Beth's sitting here and Joan's not here, and Helen's not here, but goal setting is key, but you have to tap the motivation of the person. Guided discovery fosters the action planning and strategies for transfer to other activities. Practice supports repetition for skill development. Experience overcomes environmental barriers, and it allows people to use what's meaningful and important to them to support their own brain recovery as they live their lives, not as we treat them. So we have to help them understand they're going through a recovery process because they've had brain injury and that they need to be challenged for their daily lives to reappear. Okay, so what we need to do is help them know how to develop or recover. And what do we learn? We learn about people, occupations, and environment, but I want you to put the narrative. If you go back to Gary's work, there was always a critical narrative that learned about who the person was, what they wanted to do, how they wanted to achieve it. Now we've got to put that narrative in place in our interactions to use the knowledge that's been developed by all these young scientists to understand cognition and sensory systems and motor and physiology and psychology and spirituality. But now we've got all this technology to use, and we got to put family support into the perspective. So OTs, we've got it. We just need to use it, and we need to understand that what we're doing is really applied neuroscience. And occupational science is a critical factor. So participation, development, health, and well-being comes from what we know to help people help themselves. So let's approach all our clients to support their recovery by helping them set and be motivated by their own goals and learn to generate their own strategies to do what they want and need to do. If they don't have the cognitive capacity to learn or process, then teach their families how to provide the support to help them do what they can do, because can-doing will keep them going even without really high-level cognitive function. So that's 48 years of science. And I've been blessed to have financial support for these major studies to do this. But all it did was come back to what our founders knew was possible. And that's where Rita Levy-Montecleve comes in. She said science requires you to be creative and innovative and to go with your hunches. But you got to test them. You got to structure them. You got to get them to policy. And we just need to continue with our science. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Baum. Your exceptional contributions to the field of occupational therapy are incredible and have a lasting impact in really helping us understand functional cognition and executive function. So thank you. Your dedication continues to inspire all of us. So thank you for that.